with the practically overwhelming dominance of South Korea in League of Legends and in other areas of esports, we've seen a set of excuses or reasons, but the way they're applied tend to be in the form of excuses, almost codified at this point in time, arrived at as a consensus as to why the West lags behind Korea and why Korea is so successful and so dominant and repeatedly has teams that are in the finals, that are winning championships, that are the best in the world and are considered the best in the world, and even prove it in terms of trophy haul. Now, these reasons can be summarized as follows. So South Korea has amazing internet. South Korea is a small country in contrast, for example, to all of Europe, to North America, to the USA. Practically everyone involved in esports in South Korea lives in Seoul, in the one big capital city. Everyone lives in the one city. In contrast to, obviously, in Europe, people are spread all about, but then move to Berlin for LCS. In North America, people can be across the entire country and then move to one spot, LA, for example, to be in the studio for NALCS. Infrastructure. When people talk about infrastructure, usually what they mean, aside from like sponsorships, team houses, because now all the West has these things, usually they mean coaching. So a lineage of coaches that goes back to Brood War and the early days. So people will always say 10 or more years of this history of coaching and developing talent. And they'll also talk about the idea of coaches who are involved in the day-to-day life of the team, who are life coaches, who are in-game coaches, who are working on developing players. I'll talk about the ranked environment over there, where there's many, many more people playing ranked, and then of the people playing ranked, they're all trying incredibly hard, and so Challenger is incredibly competitive, and a very, very good place to train your skills outside of scrims, outside of official games. But when we consider all of these excuses, now as reasons, they all have merit. Like there's certainly an element of truth or something accurate about each of those statements that is a reason why Korea is ahead. But the reason why they become excuses, one of the things that defines an excuse for me is when someone will take something and it's a reason as to why someone's better, and they won't look for what they could apply themselves or how they could match it. They'll use the excuse as a way to deflect away from ever having to match up to that standard. So they'll say they have X and I don't have X, therefore I can never succeed in the same way, and they'll always have an unfair advantage. They never really consider, how can I get to that, or how can I find something else that mirrors that? So let's consider the Western approach to how they could kind of bridge the gap on each of these topics, and also we'll consider possibly what Riot's role could be in this, because even though Riot in theory should be the overall developer who doesn't have any favoritism as to which regions succeed and would like every region to just develop organically, that hasn't been the case. And we've seen in interviews they'd like it if the Western region was good. Certainly the way LCS seems to be structured and some of the regional looking aspects feel as though they want the Western regions to do better and to succeed more. It feels as though LCS is theirs, and yes, now they've taken more of an active role in LPL, in obviously LCK now in Korea, but overall they are from the West, they'll always have something of a Western-centric perspective. Even if they think otherwise, that will always be part of their DNA and their natural bias. It feels like, if not an overt bias. So, the reason why these are excuses is because so far, no legitimate attempt has been made to replicate nearly any of these factors. So they're saying it's a huge advantage, and yet they're not trying to get the competitive advantage themselves. So here's an example. Let's go to the first one, which is about the small country. Because, okay, internet, yeah, as gamers, nobody in the esports industry can improve the quality of the internet. The internet is fantastic in Korea, and it's very well wired, so the routing's fantastic. But as well as the internet being fantastic, it's helped by the fact that since they're all in one city, Seoul, and the server's in Seoul, they're also getting the fastest connection to the server, and they're all near each other. So we could at least start to replicate that, right? Why can't all of the North American League of Legends pros move to one big city? Now, in a way they have. They've moved to Los Angeles, but only for LCS. Why doesn't everyone who wants to be involved in North American League of Legends move to one city? Why don't all the semi-pro players and all the semi-pro teams set up there? And all the Challenger essentially is what semi-pro. All the Challenger teams set up there and have this whole hub there, so that even when people want to go join a team, they're moving from one house a couple of miles over to another house. And they're just based there, and their life is around there, and it becomes an industry like anywhere else. Why doesn't that happen in North America? I'll tell you one of the reasons why. Because people who are in these Challenger teams or amateur teams don't necessarily want to give up a cushy life wherever they are. Don't want to give up all these things. Or if they do, they're based wherever they are at that point in time, and they're playing all their games on the internet. So Riot needs to help them out in this respect. If Riot put a server where the players were, now the players could be in one city and all have fastest connection to the server. Now, whether or not they would have as good as Korea is irrelevant. If they could have 20 to 30 ping, that already is a great start. Now then, if Riot put a special server separate to even solo queue there, now they could practice there, in theory with less traffic on the server, have best possible connections to it, and it could only be pro players there, and it could be an incredible training ground for pros and people who are in the challenger scene. So they're battling each other in their own mini solo queue that's off server, as it were. Now, one of the reasons why they probably won't do that is because they want you to play the public mode. They want you to grind on the real solo queue and all the rest of it. So in that scenario, so you interact with randoms and you just play, you stream and all the rest of it, and people feel as though they could play with you if they were good enough. That's all great, but if you're going to use that as a good thing, well, then you have to acknowledge that it's going to take away from some of the competitive side, because if you're behind a region, they have an advantage, you have to find out a way to level that out, to neutralize the advantage, or to get up to a similar level, or to find something else that gets you closer. Can't just give up the excuse, oh, well, I'd rather people play solo queue. Well, then they won't be as good. Problem solved. Another thing Riot could do is make a special practice center in that city where it has a bunch of PCs, 5 PCs per team, and let's say 4 teams can go in at any period of 2 hours or something. Teams can make block bookings. They go there and they actually practice on LAN against each other in an amazing environment where they can all play with the best possible ping, etc. They could even go there and all play this off-server solo queue against each other with the best possible ping. This would neutralize some of the advantage of the amazing internet and all being in one city. We've started to find ways to get around that. But at the moment, even though teams have the money for this, even though some players would be into this if the option was there, there's not the option because Riot doesn't play ball in that sense. They don't help out in that respect. They don't even make any attempt to simulate or copy some of the better aspects of what supposedly experts, and I agree with some of them, has helped Korea become better. It's not the whole sole thing. That's the obvious point I'm trying to make. In terms of the infrastructure, if the infrastructure is so amazing, and I made this point before, if the infrastructure in Korea is so amazing, and that's what makes players great, so coaching, the amazing leagues they have, all living in one city, all on the internet, then why is it that you get fantastic players who come through who don't live in Seoul, who aren't in team houses, who've never experienced that coaching, who've never experienced any aspect of the infrastructure? They've just at their home on their PC installed the game, started playing it, or gone to a PC bang near them, PC cafe in their city, played the game, become very good at it, ground their way up, got to Diamond, got to Masters, got to Challenger, been picked up by a team, then gotten into the system. But they've already been fantastic at that point in time. How is that possible? Now, that's one of those areas where the excuses obviously don't all work. There's also the factor that a lot of these things here, in terms of what the Koreans have and what the West doesn't have on many of these areas, China doesn't have a lot of these areas here. They don't have such a great history of coaching that goes back into Brood War and all the rest of it. They don't have that. They don't have that aspect of it. Yet China won MSI. Yet China has had the best team in the world a couple of times. EDG. This one that won MSI. Then before that, there was obviously World Elite years ago. They've had great success. They've made all these world finals. They've made all these top 4s at Worlds. They've had fantastic results, better than the West, yet they haven't had some of these advantages Korea had. They haven't had all these extra things that people make out is the only reason why. Yes, they did poorly at Worlds in IM San Jose, but then they did well at IM Cologne. They are a region that's consistently outperformed the 2 Western regions of EU and NA, yet they haven't had these advantages. So it's not as simple as that. Also, when you talk about coaching when it comes to infrastructure, how about we actually find out what these coaches do for players? Because before that, how can we assign it such power in creating the good player? How do we know how much he molds a player? How do we know how much they direct a player or they instill the strategy into a player? We don't really know that much. Coaching issue, this one particularly, is also a lot more complex than people make it out to be, in my opinion. It's not that they have this history of Korean esports that goes back into StarCraft 2 and Brood War and 10 years back, and there's this lineage of amazing coaches who pass from one to the next, like Wisdom of the Wizards or something in some fantasy swords and sorcery novel. That's not the case at all. You look at the majority of the coaches now, and the best coaches now in Korea tend to have only been coaching for 1 or 2 years. Or they're really, really successful at maybe 2 or 3 years. And a number of them who've been around the similar amount of time, or maybe even longer. In fact, some of the ones that were around longer, like the CJ ones, are actually some of the worst coaches. And some of the Najin coaches who have shown failures season after season and had some successes but not made the most out of their rosters. So it's not as simple as that there's this magical lineage. Part of the reason, in my opinion, as to why the coaching structure is so good there, first of all, they accept the concept and did from the day one that coaches were necessary. And so, since you need coaches, people who are coaches and are starting out as coaches without this 9 years and are starting out, they were former pros or they were analysts or they were diamond players who've put all their mind to trying to train in the game. These people get a chance to be coaches and they get a chance to improve, and people listen to what they're saying and try to apply it so they can learn from their mistakes. And as they learn as coaches, some of them become good coaches, some of them become bad coaches, some of them become average coaches. But as you let all these people try, eventually some will become good coaches and you scoop that cream off and they go to the good teams. Then you have a scenario where, they also pay coaches as well. Secondly, their cultural kind of milieu of this hierarchy of people who are older than you or elders or in a position of authority or above you in your workplace means that naturally the Korean players are more receptive to coaching. They're going to listen to what the coach says. Even the star player can't just disregard his coach. He definitely can't disrespect his coach and tell him, you don't know anything, I'm not going to do that. That was a stupid plan. He definitely can't do any of that stuff, no matter who he is. No matter if he's faker, no matter if he was shy, no matter if he was flame. Doesn't matter who this guy is, he can't do that ever. It's also the factor that because of the cultural aspect, they would never even think to do that. Oftentimes, the coach is someone who brought that player into the team, even though now he's a star player. And he gave them a place in the team, and he gave them a chance in the team. And they've actually made good on his chance and made good on his faith in them. And so they respect him, and they consider him part of their journey and their success. They don't get good and then go, oh, fuck this guy, get someone else. Not only that, he often becomes a father figure or an elder figure or older brother aspect to them, and they take on that relationship with him and try to learn from him and understand that he might not always be right, but he's trying his best as well, and he's part of the team as well. And my job is to execute here, and his job is to execute there, and we're trying to work as a team. This kind of cohesiveness is so rarely there in the West. People say it all in interviews in the West, but I think part of that is that they desperately want that connection, because naturally as humans we want that, but it's not quite there, and so they're trying to fill in the blanks, just like when you first meet someone and you kind of like some things about them and you think, hey, we could be friends, and they're giving off the similar signal that we're going to be friends. People in the early days tend to have the honeymoon period of friends where they go a bit too ham at it and then they settle off and they figure out, actually, where are we? In that period when everything seems like it's going great is what it reminds me of the first 3 weeks of LCS teams when they've got a coach. Oh, this coach is wonderful, they're making jokes to them, this is going great, and at the end of the split they tell, yeah, that guy didn't know what he was talking about. Actually, yeah, it didn't work out with him. It turns out he was actually like a failure, he wasn't aggressive enough, he didn't really give us things, he was kind of too passive with a lot of players. Where was all that shit in the first 4 weeks? So yeah, the point is, the Korean players even seek to please the coach. I mean, what an alien concept it is to so many Western teams I know of. Now, this factor, because it stems from a cultural factor of how the people are and how their culture has been for a long time, can't just be replicated identically. Probably wouldn't even suit Westerners anyway in terms of how individualistic they tend to be and how differently they think of their own goals and how to advance their own career on a personal level if you look at sports compared to the culture of Korea. Now, in terms of the people playing ranked, I actually addressed this topic in a different video where I essentially suggested that it's not as simple as people make out. I'll put that video up there. I think it was called something like the inconvenient solo queue truth or something, so it'll be up there. You can watch a whole video on that topic. Essentially, it can be boiled down to this gist. There's a culture in North America and Europe, North America particularly, of not trying, of having fun, whatever the fuck that means, as opposed to trying to prove you're the best, trying to improve all the time, trying to just play seriously. That's not the same. It's not as simple as it's one or the other, but there's less of a bleed over in that particular respect. Now, if you want to have fun and possibly improve your bank balance, then there's no excuse to be left out of the fantasy esports game. Alpha Draft has League of Legends, CSGO, Dota 2. You don't need amazing internet play Alpha Draft. Your country can be as large or as small as it happens to be, and you definitely don't need to move to Seoul, even though I did it anyway and I'm a baller, I still play Alpha Draft there. Yeah. Draft your team today and start winning contests. Or don't. It's the end of the video. Fuck you want me